Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Max.
Welcome to your local news channel, GEM. It is Friday, December 15th, 1995. Before we get into today's news, we would like to thank our sponsor, Skechers, for their support. If you enjoy this channel, please go to our website or call today to donate to keep getting the latest information that you need for your day. Our donation number is 860-847-JEMM. Again, that's 860-847-5366. Hey Jeremy, what are the roads looking like this morning?
Good morning, Max. Route 98 is a little backed up going south due to gathering teenagers starting a communist revolution. Route 87 is at a standstill, and this morning a gorilla escaped from a local zoo and is sleeping on the road backing up traffic. I'm hearing that SWAT's on the way to handle the situation. Other than that, everything's good. Back to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Today we'll be talking about the Reagan years, what Ronald Reagan did while he was president, and how it affected the United States. Ronald Wilson Reagan was an American politician for the Republican Party who served as the 40th President of the United States from 1981 to 1989. Here to tell us more is our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Maaria.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Prior to his presidency, Reagan was a Hollywood actor and a union leader who followed democratic ideals. But by 1962, he was conservative and served as the 33rd governor of California from 1967 to 1975. As a Republican, he pursued a policy of neoliberal economics, which included seeking tax cuts, reducing government spending, and social control. Towards the end of his presidency, he was involved in negotiations with Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev, which led to treaties reducing the nuclear capabilities of both countries and ending the Cold War.
Before he was a president, Reagan signed an Economic Recovery Tax Act, ERTA, passed Congress on August 4th, 1981, and was signed into law on August 13, 1981. The act was a major tax cut designed to encourage economic growth. This act cut estate tax and trim tax paid by business corporation by $150 billion over a 5-year period. It also reduced the top tax rate from 70% to 50% and reduced overall tax rate by 25%.
Ronald Reagan made a lot of changes to America during his presidency. Reagan was the one who started the Strategic Defense Initiative, or the SDI. Nicknamed the Star Wars program, it was introduced in 1983 and was a program to create anti-missile technology in order to prevent and defend from nuclear attacks from the Soviet Union and other nations. It was given up on after a few years because the technology needed a surplus of nuclear energy and they didn't have the resources to make more nuclear plants. Also, Congress decided that an anti-nuclear missile program would only cause more tension and possibly conflict between the U.S. and the USSR.
In 1985, Reagan gave the Reagan Doctrine speech. The Reagan Doctrine allowed the U.S. to support anti-communist groups all across the globe, supplying money and aid. It was specifically designed to help out the groups such as the Contras in Nicaragua, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and the UNTIA in Angola to help fight against communist groups in the surrounding area. But unfortunately for Reagan, Congress later passed a Boland amendments restraining any U.S. activity in Iran. Congress had discovered that the arms and money being supplied to the Contras in Nicaragua and the Mujahideen had been misused in frequent illegal ways. The Contras and the Mujahideen had also caused numerous terrorist attacks and possessed mercenaries that used cruel war techniques to the Soviet Union. Communist forces ultimately leading to the banning of all military arms in support of the Contras and the Mujahideen groups. Elizabeth has more to add on that.
Thanks, Jeremy. The Contras were rebels seeking to overthrow the socialist Sandinista government of Nicaragua. Because they were anti-communist and the Cold War was at its most devastating, the Reagan administration wanted to help and support them. But the Boland Amendment, 3 U.S. legislative amendments between 1982 and 1984, all aimed at limiting the U.S. government assistance to the Contras. John Podesta and Oliver North, 2 officials from the Reagan administration, decided to take matters into their own hands. They hatched a plan to sell arms to the Iranian government and use some of their profits from selling illegal arms to fund the Contras. Of course, Congress found out, and in November 1986, a series of congressional hearings followed. Both John Podesta and Oliver North lost their jobs, but no evidence supported North's claim that Reagan and his Vice President Bush had known about the Iran-Contra scandal or actively participated in its success. Now to Max with more on Reagan.
The arms race during the Cold War was when the US and the USSR made thousands of nuclear warheads, each nation trying to have more than the other. There was tension caused by the development and testing of weapons starting around 1950. The USSR tested their first nuclear bomb in 1949, far before anyone thought that they had the technology. The US then tested the world's first successful hydrogen bomb on November 1st, 1952, on an island in the Pacific Ocean. The bomb killed all of the life on the nearby islands and had a cloud 25 miles high and 100 miles across. Both nations started stockpiling extreme amounts of nuclear weapons. The United States broke the 30,000 mark by 1963, and even though the Soviets only broke 30,000 around 1980, the Soviet bomb count reached over 40,000 by 1985. The US only reached about 31,000 bombs at the most, and by 1985, that number had dropped to 24,000. In 2002, both powers only had about 10,000 bombs, and by 2010, both had 5,000. In his first term, Reagan spent nearly as much on defense as President Nixon, Ford, and Carter combined, and much more than both the cost of the Korean and Vietnam Wars. Ironically, Reagan was a successful nuclear abolitionist during the Cold War and had boosted the freeze movement and anti-weapons movement.
When Mikhail Gorbachev came into power in the Soviet Union in 1985, no one predicted the revolution he would bring. A dedicated reformer, Gorbachev introduced the policies of glasnost and perestroika into the USSR. Glasnost meant a greater willingness on the part of Soviet officials to allow Western ideas and goods into the USSR. Perestroika was a plan that would limit market incentives to Soviet citizens. Gorbachev thought that these changes would spark the economy. The freedom that the policies gave led to a revolution that ended the Cold War.
1986 was an important year for Ronald Reagan. On October 22, he signed the Tax Reform Act of 1986 into law, which lowered the top income tax rate to 28% on October 27. Reagan signed into law the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 that budgeted $1.7 billion to fund the war on drugs, and specific 29 new mandatory minimum sentence for drug offense.
That same year, Reagan and the Soviet Union's leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, discussed a negotiation to create the first nuclear reduction in nuclear weapons. Ronald Reagan's and Mikhail Gorbachev's friendship turned the once-bitter rivals into close friends. It was a key factor in paving the way to peace and the end of Cold War I in 1991.
START 1 was the first treaty to call for deep reductions of the U.S. and Soviet nuclear weapons. Signed July 31, 1991, the treaty had a 15-year duration with an option to extend it for unlimited 5-year periods, if all parties agreed. As Jeremy stated, this was extremely vital to the ending of the Cold War.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That about covers the Reagan era and what we know today. Thank you to Maaria, Ahmad, Jeremy White, and Jaidu for being here today. Be sure to tune into our next bit about the commuter train who hit a school bus in October, killing 7 children. And that is now causing big crossing improvements and new rules for bus drivers. Also, James Bond returns to cinemas, and President Bill Clinton confirms that Area 51 exists.